just based on what we saw in that one incident, Nick, I'm not sure that it should have been an ejection. But to your point, that really stung from you're sitting there saying, oh my gosh, this is a significant source of Kansas' offense. But not just that, Nick. Hunter Dickinson is a huge source of Kansas's late game offense. I mean, look at the North Carolina game where it's a close game and Kansas's offense was basically like, hey, Hunter, like, go get us a bucket. And, I think a lot of us felt like, hey, there's a chance maybe the defense steps up with Hunter Dickinson being out. Flory Bidunga is a really good defender, has great athleticism. Obviously not the polished low post scorer that Hunter Dickinson is. And so you were wondering, can Kansas win this game since points are going to be so hard to come by at this?
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible. Paid all who enter. Beware of this podcast. That's right, this is the paid podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer. I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible. Member FDIC. Coming to your ears and your eyes if you're watching on YouTube with a very special edition of a Feast Week episode with Kansas basketball taking down Duke on a Tuesday night at the, what do they call it, Kevin? The Terry's Chocolate something classic. I don't know. Whatever. The point is NIL, whatever. Blah, 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 blah. Which we may have more of the conversation about that as well later on in the show. As always, if you like what you are watching, if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to drop a subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're going to be going live on Saturday as well after KU football's final game against Baylor coming up on Saturday afternoon. So you want to turn on that alarm bell and notification bell so you'll know when to tune in for our live show after KU plays Baylor. You can also like as well this show and other shows and drop a comment and share your thoughts also. If you're listening on our platforms, you can do the same thing. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and drop a 5-star rating and review as well. Speaking of 5-star ratings and reviews, Kevin, that was a 5-star game, I would say, on Tuesday night between Duke and Kansas. Kansas pulls it out. A lot to get to, obviously, in this game. Kansas wins 75-72. Duke had a kind of a smart play at the end with the inbounds to get it to midcourt. They called timeout, and then at the end, they unable to hit a shot to try to tie it. So what was just your immediate takeaways from a really gritty win for Kansas, who, by the way, now has wins over North Carolina, Michigan State, and now Duke as well, and we're not even into December yet.
Yeah, Feast Week is one of the best weeks of college basketball season, and part of the reason is occasionally you do get elite matchups in that first week of basketball, but it's the first week of basketball, right? Like people are playing like it's the first week of basketball. They're trying to figure out their roles. By the time you get to Feast Week, you have a little bit better understanding of where you're at. Guys are starting to settle into roles. AJ Storr gets his first start last night against Duke. Obviously, that would seem to be something that would be fairly big moving forward if he's able to hold on to that spot and play well. But really, Nick, I thought this game came down to, and especially with the ejection of Hunter Dickinson, I thought it came down to really two guys for the most part. Rylan Griffin did play really well down the stretch, gave him some points when points were at an absolute premium and KU was not generating points. But game long, DeJuan Harris and KJ Adams in this one. Both of them were terrific defensively. KJ did have help on Cooper Flagg. I've seen a lot of people saying, hey, KJ just absolutely put a straitjacket on Cooper Flagg, and he did a terrific job on Cooper Flagg. He did have some help, of course. They were sending doubles, blitzing him when they had the chance. And that was maybe, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this. That was maybe KJ Adams' best defensive game as a Jayhawk. And he's had some good ones, but I thought that especially given the setting, given the guys that he was going against, given his ability to not just defend Cooper Flagg, but kind of be in the middle of everything, obviously had a really big block down the stretch as well. I thought that was his best defensive game in Kansas.
Yeah, the first half especially, Cooper Flagg was in hell. I mean, he was having a really hard time. In the second half, you saw Cooper Flagg have a lot more success, and a lot of that I think had to do with Hunter Dickinson not being in the game. late in the game, Cooper Flagg had multiple times where he was pretty much able to just get to the rim without even having to, worry about anything essentially. And so I think that was more to do with no Hunter Dickinson out there. But yeah, in the first half, especially, Cooper Flagg really struggled. I think he had just 2 points in the first half. And, KJ Adams himself talked about it in the postgame show or on the postgame press conference saying, hey, our game plan was basically to heat up those young guys, right? And that's really what this matchup came down to. It was a very, very talented team in Duke, probably one of the most talented teams in the country on paper, right, with some of the young guys that they have, not just Cooper Flagg, but their big man, Malawak, who is a guy that KU was heavily recruiting as well. Knepel, obviously, is a young guy that has a lot of star potential versus a team in Kansas that similarly has a lot of firepower, but also has the incredible experience to back it up when you consider some of the guys they have on the roster, right? I mean, ESPN put up that graphic, Kevin, at the start of the game. Hunter Dickinson is 7 years older than Cooper Flagg.
Yeah.
7 years older. That's insane. But yeah, the experience for Kansas really showed, right? And it starts with DeJuan Harris and KJ Adams. And this is where I wonder if get this game in particular and say, hey, look, the transfer portal is great. Recruiting high-level players is great and all that stuff. But, man, if you want to win big-time games, it's critical to have a couple of those really, really high-level program guys, right? Like guys that understand the game, understand what your team's trying to do. KJ Adams, Bill Self said, hey, look, this guy proved once again last night that you can impact the game at an incredibly, incredibly high level without being an elite scorer, right? I think college basketball, especially in the past couple of years, has really shifted to this mindset of offense, right? Like it's all about scoring. It's all about shooting threes, all that stuff, right? And so because of that, I think guys like KJ Adams really get kind of, turned aside as like, oh man, he can't really shoot. He's sometimes inefficient as a rebounder. Like, what exactly does he do out there? What does KJ Adams do? Brr, right? This was a game we saw exactly what KJ Adams does and the type of player that he is and how he can impact the game. And then that's not even getting into DeJuan Harris, right? Who also had probably one of his best games. I mean, he was phenomenal as well.
Just rigging plays, right? I mean, the way that he ran the offense, and you can tell a major gap with Kansas's offense between when DeJuan Harris is in the ball game and has the ball in his hands and when he doesn't. And that even applies, I feel like, Nick, when they have him out there in 2-point guard sets and the ball goes to somebody else. He's still on the court, but I still think that you notice a major difference between the level of shots that Kansas is getting when the ball's in his hands versus when it's not.
Yeah, and look, there was a couple sequences I noticed, it especially even more so in the first half and early in the second half, where the sequences that looked really rough for Kansas was when neither DeJuan Harris or Hunter Dickinson were on the floor. There was one possession right before the under 12 timeout in the second half where it was 27 seconds of dribbling around the perimeter, and then Flory Badunga dribbled it off his own foot, and that was the possession.
Yeah.
Right? And so that was when I really noticed some of Kansas's struggles offensively. And this really was a game of ups and downs, right? I mean, Kansas obviously kind of blitzed Duke early in the game and looked really, really good and was really explosive, built up a double-digit lead. I think with like 4 minutes left, they were up 12. And I remember, thinking to myself, okay, great, let's just maintain this, right? Like I'm not asking Kansas to go up by 16 or 18 or whatever, just maintain a 12-point lead for the half. And then the things kind of went off the rails towards the end of the first half. You had the really, really bad shot from Rylan Griffin at the end of the half that really, really stung for Kansas, right? I mean, that's basically a 5 to 7 point swing almost. If you think about that sequence for Kansas, there's 18 seconds left in the first half. You've got a transition situation, but the shot clock is off, right? If you just hold for the last shot, you're up 5. Worst case, you're probably just going to still be up 5, right?
Yep.
And best case, you could be up 7 or 8. And obviously, he kind of goes for that transition 3. Duke gets it back. They end up hitting kind of a crazy 3. And then all of a sudden, you go from being up 5 or up 7 or up 8 to only being up 2, which was kind of a big blow right at the end of the half. But then Kansas came out again in the second half, Kevin, and again, were pretty explosive early in the half.
Yeah, I think so. And I think they were starting to find a way to get Hunter Dickinson involved in a game where it wasn't easy for him to get involved. Look, they mentioned it on the broadcast several times. Duke's the tallest team in the country in terms of the length that they have out there. And I think it showed. There wasn't a lot of the easier looks that you're used to seeing Hunter Dickinson get. And I thought the other area where you really saw it, Nick, was whenever Kansas would sort of attack the middle of the paint, like AJ Storr or somebody would try and dribble in through the middle, you were seeing a lot of arms and a lot of length there, kind of disrupting stuff. And when that happened, and so Kansas started looking really good in the second half, to your point. And then the thing happened, right? Well, do we want to talk about it before the break or after the break?
Probably we'll get to the break. Yeah, we'll probably get to the break. But I have no idea what you're talking about, Kevin. I don't even know what you're referencing. So I guess we'll have to find out on this on the other side of the break. But yeah, as Kevin said, we do have to take a break. As always, got to tell you about Home Field Apparel, our friends over at Home Field Apparel. I'm rocking the Warhawk Kansas Relay shirt here today in support of Kansas and their big victory over Duke on Tuesday night. So this is a great opportunity for you to head over to Home Field Apparel, get yourself some gear. And listen, if you've got somebody in your family who is a fan of maybe a different school or whatever, Home Field's got over 130 schools. This is a great chance to get the perfect Christmas present for your loved ones, for yourself even, right? I mean, listen, we need to normalize Christmas presents for ourselves. That's what I'm here to say. Normalize buying something for yourself. And you can do that over at Home Field Apparel. You can use the promo code PAYHEAD24, 15% off your first order. You can also use an exclusive Black Friday sale happening right now site-wide on Home Field Apparel through December 3rd with the code. It's a BFCM24. Let me double check to make sure I've got that right. Make sure I don't have it backwards. Oh, that's right. BFCM24. BFCM24 gets you 30% off site-wide over at homefieldapparel.com. More KU basketball talk and something very specific that happened in the game that I'm sure we'll dive into. That's coming up on the other side. Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your number one source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com. This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer. I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. Once again, if you like what you are seeing or listening, you can be sure to subscribe, drop a comment, drop a like, leave a 5-star rating review, all that good stuff to spread the word about our show here on the Kansas City Sports Network. We are brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, as always. So right before the break there, Kevin, you were talking about something that did happen. So Kansas was up 52-45, I believe, to start the second half. They built up a little bit of a lead. Duke kind of fights back. It's a pretty nip and tuck game. There's about 11 minutes left. Kansas is up 2. Hunter Dickinson goes up for a rebound against Brown for Duke. They get tangled up. They go down. A foul is called. And then they go to the monitor to review what appears to be Hunter Dickinson, his foot hitting Brown in the face. They slow it down. They're looking at it. Fran Fraschilla, of course, is giving his thoughts, but not like anyone cares. No, I'm just kidding. I actually like, generally speaking, I like Fran Fraschilla. I know a lot of K fans don't. I think he's fine for the most part, but he was particularly rough, actually, at the Tuesday game for Duke. But anyways, that's not the point. Dickinson's foot, his right foot seemingly kind of flips up and hits Brown in the face. And I don't know, Kevin, like the replays that they were showing on the broadcast, it looked really, really like it was not intentional. If you actually look at the replay, at the moment that his foot kind of gets up near Brown's face, you can see Dickinson's head is like turned the other direction. Like he can't even really see what's happening. Right. So I don't think there's really an argument to be made that it was like overly intentional. But they slowed it down. And originally I thought, maybe, okay, as worst case, this is like a flagrant one or like a technical foul, maybe worst case. And then they come back and they say, see ya. And I was like, what in the world is going on? And there's still 10 minutes left in the game. It's a 2-point game. You're thinking, oh boy, how is Kansas going to find a way to win this one?
Yeah. And I, to your point, if you look at Twitter, which of course is not real life, but you saw people either ranging from, based on their rooting interest, I think, either saying, oh, it was fully accidental, nothing really happened, it wasn't a big deal, to Hunter Dickinson jump kicked him Liu Kang style. So pro combat, and the truth is that it's probably somewhere in the middle. I know Fraschilla on the broadcast was advocating for a dead ball technical. I thought it might be a flagrant one, like you said. I did not see the ejection coming. I really didn't. And I think with the ejection, like you have to discern intent that I'm not sure was discernible based on the clip. And I'm not even saying he didn't mean to kind of kick him a little bit or whatever, But like you said, like it would have been very difficult. It almost had to be perfect for him to kick him in the face based on his positioning, based on the fact he couldn't even look at him. Look, this was a chippy matchup between those two guys. You know, both of them were kind of eating elbows. Both of them were, as a matter of fact, I think Brown ate an elbow, you know, as Dickinson drove to the basket on that very possession.
And
he
you had
undercut Hunter Dickinson when he went up for the rebound, which is the foul that was called. But it had been going on for a while, I think, where it was probably physical and bordering on, this isn't really, you know, within the rules of basketball. But it just based on what we saw in that one incident, Nick, I'm not sure that it should have been an ejection. But to your point, that really stung from you're sitting there saying, oh my gosh, you know, this is a significant source of Kansas' offense. But not just that, Nick. Hunter Dickinson is a huge source of Kansas's late game offense. I mean, look at the North Carolina game where it's a close game and Kansas's offense was basically like, hey, Hunter, like, go get us a bucket. And, I think a lot of us felt like, hey, there's a chance maybe the defense steps up with Hunter Dickinson being out. Flory Bidunga is a really good defender, has great athleticism. Obviously not the polished low post scorer that Hunter Dickinson is. And so you were wondering, can Kansas win this game since points are going to be so hard to come by at this point?
Well, just to add on to what you were describing about the physicality of it, remember earlier in the second half, there was that hook and hold flow where I think Hunter Dickinson really benefited from kind of hooking Brown and getting a call earlier in the half. But yeah, really that was sort of the beginning of just a bizarre sequence, Kevin, because you have the ejection, right? And then they let Hunter Dickinson go back to the bench, which I was happen, I don't think. And then there's like 3 straight fouls called on Duke within like 6 seconds right after that.
And they were, to be fair, they were all legitimate fouls. And that was, you know, Fran was almost like begging Duke on the broadcast, like, hey, like, stop fouling. But it was funny because, you know, if they weren't as obvious of fouls, you could be like, oh, that's makeup call stuff. But I mean, I don't know what got into Duke's head at that point, but they committed 3 straight fouls, and Nick, none of them were even remotely controversial. I mean, they were all things where it's like, oh, your hands are all over this guy. Yeah, they're going to call that.
Yeah, so that started kind of that weird sequence, and then it was really all hands on deck from there, right? I mean, with no Hunter Dickinson, you know, I kind of mentioned earlier in the show, I actually felt that Hunter Dickinson's presence on the defensive end was really felt missing.
Yeah,
like I said, Cooper Flagg, I thought in the second half, he ends up scoring 10 points in the second half, and I think a lot of that was because he was able to drive to the rim without the fear of Hunter Dickinson really as his size. And that's not a knock on Flory Bidunga. It's just Hunter Dickinson just is a bigger presence, right?
Yeah.
You know, I think we both agree Flory Bidunga can be an excellent shot blocker and a great rim protector, but just not necessarily just from the sheer size standpoint, more from the athleticism standpoint. But yeah, also the offensive end was a big question mark, right? Because I think to your point, ever since Hunter Dickinson has arrived in Lawrence, you know, last season and now into this season, you can just kind of tell when there's moments where Bill Self understands that KU needs to score a basket, they are 99.9% of the time going to be getting Hunter Dickinson 1 or more touches probably on an offensive possession. And so when you remove, you know, literally one of the best 5 players in the country, All-American level player from your offense, that's going to change a lot of things, right? And KJ Adams had a couple nice plays. Ryland Griffin, as you mentioned, really stepped up later in the first half, which that was great to see, Kevin, because we kind of talked about the bad sequence he had at the end of the first half. And, you know, listen, we've seen players have previous Self players have a sequence like that. And, you know, people always talk about it. You get into Bill Self's doghouse and you're just gone forever, right? But I think in a game like this, Bill Self recognized, hey, he's the type of player that you still want to have on the floor. And he ended up really making some nice plays, including hitting a big 3 and getting an and 1 late in the game as well for Kansas. And then obviously DeJuan Harris was masterful as well in doing his thing. Zeke Mayo, I thought Zeke Mayo overall, you know, look at his stat line. He was 4-11 from the floor, 2-4 from 3, finished with 12 points. But there were a couple of times where it felt like Zeke was driving or dribbling into the lane without really any intention of what he was like planning to do, right? And I think any coach will tell you, like, if you're going to drive, you need to drive with intention, either, get to the rim or looking to kick it out or whatever. So I don't know. I felt like there were some times where he wasn't really driving with any intention of doing anything. But overall, I thought he still played pretty solid. And then obviously Floyd Badunga, right? I mean, getting thrust into that moment, into that situation, overall, I think handled it really pretty well.
Yeah, he did. And he challenged some shots defensively, had some really tough rebounds, Nick. I mean, rebounds where maybe Flory's hands are stronger than I gave him credit for, because, he was going up in the middle of a bunch of guys and coming down with the rebound with guys swiping at the ball. And so he really did a great job. To your point on Rylan Griffin, that's why we've always kind of made that point about AJ Storr as well, is if you defend and you do the little things, that's how you stay out of Bill Self's doghouse. You can have a bad offensive possession. You can have the sequence at the end of the first half that you talked about where it's really brutal. And if you do the other things well, then you're still going to get a shot. And the fact that Griffin defends at the level that he does, it earned him another chance, and he definitely made the most of it. Also loved the way that he stepped up and made those free throws at the end, looked really confident. Obviously, Kansas hasn't always been the best free throw shooting team this year. And so to have some stability there where he's able to knock those down in big situations was really big. This wasn't Hunter's best game either. When you look at, I think he took 11 shots to score 11 points, also had several turnovers. Duke really swarmed after him, and Duke had more personnel able to deal with him than most teams will. I still think he was kind of set up for a fairly big sort of end of the game with the way the game was trending. But with him being out, Kansas was able to find sort of just enough points. And I thought the defense held up pretty well, like you said, with the exception of a few flag drives.
Yeah, look, I am still not sold on AJ Storr. And when I say that, I'm not saying like I think he's a bad player or anything, but like just from the standpoint of he started the game, obviously, which Bill Self kind of talked about in his post-game press conference about looking for a spark from that position, which I think probably is kind of a subtle shot towards Rylan Griffin of hey, you need to be more consistent. But man, dude, Bill Self constantly reminds everyone that will ever ask him a question about this that, hey, look, it's not always about who starts the game. It's about who ends the game. And AJ Storr was not on the floor for like the last 4 minutes of the game. He did not see the floor late in the game. It was Rylan Griffin who was out there. And so that's really what's more telling to me, right? Like, I think AJ Storr is certainly getting there. And I think, I've talked about it previously, like he may be one of the biggest X factors on this team, especially if they want to, potentially cut down the nets in April. But in this particular game, and so far this season, you've seen like he may be progressing, but he's obviously not fully there in terms of maybe what he can be, right? Because he wasn't on the floor to end the game for KU in this one against Duke. It was Rylan Griffin. And, despite AJ Storr starting, despite Rylan Griffin having a bad end of the first half, Bill Self still went to him late in the game over AJ Storr essentially down the stretch. And so that's really telling. I don't think it's a knock against AJ Storr. I think it's just, hey, look, he's still, getting there or still getting to whatever Bill Self wants him to be in terms of an overall player. But it seems like Rylan Griffin, even though he may be inconsistent at times and AJ Storr gets the start against in this one against Duke, it seems like Rylan Griffin is still has a leg up in that scenario in terms of being the guy at that position late in games.
Yeah, and I thought AJ did some good things defensively, and obviously that's part of sort of the formula to unlock him in Self's good graces, if you will. He did hit some big shots, but to your point, one of the things that we've talked about with that spot is you need somebody at that spot to rebound, to help you out. I mean, obviously, you're not expecting them to be Kevin McCullough, who was just a terrific rebounder from the 3 spot, but you do expect some help from that spot. Rylan Griffin had 3 boards in 17 minutes. AJ Storr played 28 minutes and did not grab a rebound. And If you look at stuff like that, I almost guarantee you that that's going to be a talking point for Bill Self heading into this one is, hey, AJ, you did some of this stuff better, that we've been wanting you to do, but, you can't be out there if you're not going to help us on the glass.
A couple of the notes. You mentioned the rebounding. I mean, Duke, as you said, tallest team in the country, and Kansas out-rebounded them. And they did that with no Hunter Dickinson for, 10-plus minutes of the second half. Floyd Badunga was great. You look at KJ Adams and what he ended up – I think KJ Adams ended up with looking at the box score here. He ended up with just 2 rebounds, but still was incredibly effective. It was Badunga with 8 as well. So they out-rebound him. You mentioned the free throw shooting for Kansas down the stretch. That was big. KU was 11 of 12 from the line, so didn't get there very often, but was very effective from the free throw line, going 11 of 12. And then the three-point shooting is something that I kind of wanted to highlight here as well. Kansas only attempted 17 threes in the game. They made 8 of them, though, so they were very efficient. And I think that is the type of number that last season you were hoping you would see, right? Like, hey, last year with the team that KU had last year, they're probably not going to shoot a ton of threes, but just be efficient, right? And that obviously wasn't the case. This game, particularly, they only shoot 17 threes against Duke, but they make 8 of them. I just wonder, Kevin, I mean, do you expect this team to shoot more threes? Because, 17 threes, that's going to be certainly in the bottom percentile of three-point attempts, probably in the country, if you were to kind of extrapolate that out over the course of a season. And you look at Duke, who attempted 26, but were not nearly as efficient. Canepo goes 0 of 8. They finish 11 of 26. So, I don't know. The three-point shooting, I'm still curious about what it will look like volume-wise. Like I said, Zeke Mayo goes 2 for 4. AJ Storr hits both of his. Hunter Dickinson hit 1 and then missed 1. So they were very efficient, obviously, but I just wonder if that's a realistic number or if we will see this team start to shoot more from the perimeter as the season goes on.
I wouldn't be surprised to see it raise as they get more comfortable. So far, this has been pretty par for the course in big games, right? Against North Carolina, they shot 21 threes. Against Michigan State, they shot 17, as well as the Duke game, shooting 17. And so this is kind of where they're at right now. I'm right there with you, though, in that I do think that it could look a little bit different by, say, conference season or maybe even halfway through conference season. They do have guys that can shoot the basketball, but coming into this game, Nick, a lot of those guys weren't shooting the ball necessarily really well. And so when you're not shooting the ball well, there's a tendency to take fewer three-pointers. And while they shot well for the game, I do think that there was maybe an emphasis on, okay, get your points elsewhere right now. If guys start to get comfortable, I think AJ Storr was 2 for 2 in this one. Zeke Mayo was 2 for 4. Griffin was 1 for 4. If guys start making those shots at a little bit higher level, it wouldn't surprise me to see the number of three-point attempts lock. I don't think, we're talking 2018 Villanova here where it's just going to be bombed the wall when you come out. But I do think that, it wouldn't surprise me if by the end of the year you're seeing them take 25 threes in close games or somewhere around in there.
Look, they were in the bottom 30 of the country last year in three-point attempts versus regular, just their overall field goal attempts. So they were obviously not a team that did that very much. So far this season, they are 300. If you look at KenPom, they're 315th out of 363 teams. Last year, they were 334. So they're still really not doing it very much. I just wonder what that will look like going forward if they'll continue to do that. One other quick note here. We'd obviously mentioned that Duke was one of the tallest teams in the country. And because of that, David Coit plays 10 minutes and I think had the worst plus-minus out of anybody in the game for KU. I'm not going to read too much into that. I've kind of talked about it. Like Coit, just from a size perspective, like I think he's a guy that could be really effective against teams that are going to play smaller guards. But this was a bad matchup for him, and it kind of showed. He really was not very effective when he was out on the floor for Kansas in this particular game. And so, but then DeJuan Harris obviously was. So overall, a fantastic win for Kansas. They remain undefeated. They certainly remain number 1 in the country, you would think, after beating Duke. And you look at their upcoming schedule, they're going to play Furman again, coming back to Lawrence, coming up on Saturday afternoon. Then you've got a big one in the Big 12 Big East battle at Creighton, although Creighton looks kind of bad so far this year. So that might end up actually being a bit of an easier game. And then, of course, they go to Columbia on Sunday, December 8th, before they get ready to gear up for the start of conference play, which is going to happen at the end of December. So still lots of basketball to be had, obviously. But, I mean, like I talked about at the top of the show, we're sitting here recording this on November 27th, and you've already got wins over North Carolina, Michigan State, and Duke. Obviously, Michigan State's not really an elite team this year, but North Carolina and Duke, I think you could easily consider to be, Sweet 16, Elite 8, Final Four quality level teams. And Duke is a team that I would not be shocked if KU saw them again in late March, right? In an Elite 8 type of game as well. So, and who knows, with the type of talent they have, with freshmen, we'll see how they continue to progress over the course of this season. But, look, I thought listen, the Kansas social media team did a great with their posts after the win. Listen, the house always wins, baby. The house always wins. College basketball runs through Lawrence, Kansas. College basketball was built in Lawrence, Kansas, literally and metaphorically. And they proved it again on Tuesday night with the big win against Duke. Kevin, any other final thoughts before we get out of here?
No. Well, I will say one. I tweeted this after the game, but I don't see any way that Kansas wins that game a year ago with the Hunter Dickinson ejection. I don't think the depth was there. I don't think that they had enough answers if he wasn't in there. And so the win really spoke, I think, to the increased depth that Kansas has, having another option, not just at that position, but also at spots where guys maybe weren't playing well. And so I also think if Kansas and Duke were to match up later, if they played each other in March Madness, Nick, would you expect a fully functional Shaq Moore to potentially get some of those David Coit minutes based on just matchups and things of that nature? I think that's another area where Kansas can continue to get deeper and maybe have another option in those spots in areas where maybe David Coit isn't going to be as effective.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? I think you and I both agree, Kevin, that Shaq Moore is maybe one of the toughest guys on the team for Kansas, right? When you look at what he's done and you think about the win against Duke, that was a toughness win, and they did it without maybe one of their toughest guys, just in terms of that dog mentality type of guy. So, yeah, Shaq Moore could have a major impact. Bill Self said pregame about Shaq Moore that his foot just keeps flaring up. So hopefully that's something that they can, get working on. I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, hey, look, maybe you don't really need him that much through the rest of non-conference play. If it takes that long to really get him fully back. I mean, you have that sort of mini break of about 9-10 days in between end of conference play and over Christmas break into the start of conference play. Hopefully that's enough time to maybe get him fully back. If it were me, I would certainly be in no rush to get him back at this point, given kind of how Kansas is playing right now and the rest of non-conference play. So we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, certainly I think he would slot in perfectly into that type. I mean, I think he would have been perfect for that type of game on Tuesday night against Duke. So, hopefully he can get going as well for Kansas and get through that injury also. So if nothing else, Kevin, I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up then. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone that is tuning in to the show. Hopefully you are with your family. I'm actually at my parents' house right now, so I'm going to be going to enjoy some Thanksgiving camaraderie with my family as well. Hopefully you're doing the same. And be sure to like, subscribe, drop a comment, share your thoughts. And again, Kevin and I will be back on Saturday afternoon to talk KU football and Baylor. Regardless of what happens there, we'll be live on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. So be sure to head over there and subscribe, turn on your notifications so you know when we go live. Until then, happy Thanksgiving, happy holidays, hopefully to you and yours. And until then, we will talk to you again soon. See ya.